Hello, everyone. We are happy that it's Monday, and it's tomorrow's July 4th, which is great in the U.S. for those of you who celebrate that. Um, Good times. We actually went to the Stadium of Fire, which is a Utah celebration of the 4th. Met some really cool people that were veterans. One of the last living Arizona USS Arizona people. Uh, just died 3 weeks ago. So he was 102, and boy, it was great. Great tributes to the veterans who have saved our country and fought so hard in the very early wars that we had. But they had a great concert with Journey, and it was awesome to relive some of those memories and also watch the fireworks that were done to music, which was stupendous. It's just amazing. So as we go into today, it's a Monday, which, as all Mondays do, they start out very well, unfortunately. But Mondays are great. Good to see you too, SQL Dev DBA. Glad to have you back. Things have been crazy here, and so glad to see you're back. Um, so I've decided that over time there hasn't been a whole lot of questions on PolGab and other places that we watch for questions, and not that that's a bad thing or good thing. It's just that there's somehow I've not marketed it well enough, and I will. But what I've noticed is that questions for PowerShell aren't going to be probably as great as I would like them to be at this point. So what I'm going to do is, in the future, my schedule will be such that it will not illustrate that. I mean, there will always be Ask Me Anything. That's just given. I'm not going to stop people from asking me anything or asking me questions surrounding PowerShell or SQL or. The reality is that for now there may be not a whole lot of questions to ask as a content for the whole entire session that we have. So we do have one question actually in the thing. So let's enable my PolGab here so we can see it. And I don't know that it's going to. Let's see if it will show my question. Hey, look at that. And I've been having a problem with my little guy here. So let me move PolGab up here above that. There we go. So the reality is that we have not a lot of questions. So today we're graced with a question. So thank you, Bob the Lobster, for asking the question. The reality is that we're going to change the model to be learning sessions. We're just going to do some obscure learning sessions or things that people haven't seen before, and go show and tell commandlets from SQL Server module and DBA Tools module. Really, always will be related to SQL PowerShell because that's what we do. And then we'll also entertain questions. So the first question we'll entertain here is, hey, Ben, I'd like DBA Tools to automate a manual process that backs up and restores a prod DB into test DB. I'm not sure LDB users are then restored. Oh, DB users are then restored onto the test DB. Then obfuscation scripts are run. Can you please recommend ways to script out the DB users and restore them after the restore? So first of all, automating a manual process of backing up and restoring is really easy with DBA Tools because of backup DBA database and restore-DBA database. So that's easy. The obfuscation, that's going to be sample scripts that you're going to run to scramble the data, and that can be done with invoke-DBA query. I don't know that there's any obfuscation scripts that can be generic yet specific. So right now it's just however you'd like to obfuscate it. You have this process you run. Then you can do invoke-DBA query with a timeout of 0. And then it will run as long as it takes to obfuscate that data. And then the DB users, so there's a misnomer in your statement. So the idea is that if you're going to back up and restore onto a test database place, DB users are actually in the database. So when you restore, they're there. The only thing you don't have is if the logins don't exist, then the SIDs won't match up. And if the logins do exist, but they're different logins than prod, which typically I can see how that can happen. You can actually do a repair -DBA orphan user in this. Let's do get the tools here going. Okay. So why do I not have DBA tools on my machine? That seems odd to me. Let's get that in. Oh, because I'm not in administrator mode. I love you guys. We'll just do that while I'm talking about this. We'll get that going here. So the reality is that database users are in the database already, and the databases contain two parts to the user. One, the SID of the login that is associated with that user. That's how it marries it up. Two, the user already has permissions and authorization to be in that database. So it already has roles, or if it's already assigned like DB data reader or DB data writer in the source, it's always going to have that in the end because they're self-contained. The only thing that severs the connection between the new server and the old server is that login. So the logins, if they exist with different SIDs, you can actually use repair-DBA orphan user. If they don't exist, then you can create them, or if they're AD users, then that's easy to create them and the SIDs will match. If they're SQL users, then you can either copy -DBA login from the source, which is where you got the database, to the destination and have them create them on the destination, or you create them yourself and then repair orphan user to the new SID and it will match the SID. Now again, when you restore, it will overwrite them. So that's not as advantageous there, but it certainly is the option of using automation in this fashion. So first backup -DBA database, restore -DBA database. And you can actually use the place you backed up from. If it's a UNC, it's easy because you get -DBA DB backup history for the last full or whatever you did to the source, and then you can pipe that result into restore-DBA database and point it to another place. If you used a local directory when you backed up the database, you can't just use backup history because it will have the G:\SQL backup or whatever, and that won't be accessible on the destination because it has G:. So if you had it on G:, on the destination, then yes, it would work. So you'd have to figure out how you do that backup, either copy it first or give access to the test system to the backup location or something. So you'd have to work that out in your automation of how you get access to that backup file. But second, you're just going to go and make sure that when you get the restore done, that you understand, number one, you restored the database, it has users. Know whether you have logins or not logins, or you have logins that you've created and have to do repair-DBA orphan user. Repair-DBA orphan user only works with SQL logins. The Windows logins keep their SID because they're in Active Directory. So if you have those, all you have to do is create those users from Active Directory or from Windows is what the statement is. And then you can actually go ahead and do your thing. So that's your option, but that's the long end of it without writing your code for you. There are scripts out there that do something like this, but again, it's one of those things where you get to choose how you want to do it, but the DBA Tools module can do all of it, which is great. What I was going to show you is the idea of when you run this, when you do this DBA Tools, there is a repair-DBA orphan user. DB orphan user, my bad, because it's in a database. So DB orphan user, and you have the option to repair those. So I'm just going to show you that existed. All right, great question, Bob the Lobster. If you have any follow-ups, you can feel free to post them there again. So let's do this, and let's show the next question. There's another one from SQL Dev DBA. Thank you very much. This one says, hey there, what are your thoughts on using PSDBA tools and task scheduler as sort of a pseudo agent for SQL Express? It's actually a great idea. So the way I typically do it, there's two ways that are pretty easy. One, you can schedule your PowerShell.ps1 with running PowerShell and then space, and then the argument is that path to the script. You can do that. What I typically do is I build a CMD or a batch file. I use CMD now because it's universal in the Windows realm. But inside the command file, I am able to do PowerShell. Just type in PowerShell space and then the script name. And then if you want to do the parameters for execution policy, you can say bypass or whatever you want. But the reality is that Task Scheduler is a great replacement or augmentation for Express instances to use PowerShell in a scheduled way. Scheduled tasks, I mean, Windows uses them all the time. If you ever, say reboot later, it actually Task Scheduler's a reboot. It actually puts it in Task Scheduler, and if you want to stop it from rebooting, you just go into Task Scheduler, go into their thing, and stop that or delete that task, and now it won't reboot. And so Task Scheduler is a great way to use PowerShell in an automated way without having a full-blown agent. Agent's great, but it is just a scheduler. It just happens to have other features like proxies and SSIS and other things that you won't get in Task Scheduler. But if you're just going to run a script, yeah, you bet. Task Scheduler is fantastic for a replacement. I will tell you, sometimes you think that it feels wrong, but I will tell you that it's a great replacement. I wouldn't use Task Scheduler as a replacement for Agent if I had Agent available, but I certainly would use it to do things for Express, as they don't have Agent at all. Express is meant to just be there as an engine because it has limitations, and it's great. So I would use it that way. Oh, you paid good money for Express? Yeah, I hear you. So it's good. So that's all the questions we have for today. But anyway, what I want to do in the next little while is to figure out some topics, and I will post them in the schedule so that you know what things are going to happen for the day. And they could be anywhere from a script I just did to do some fun things. It could be one thing I worked on today, SQL bulk copy. That's going to be one of them that's going to come up. I'm going to teach you how to use SQL bulk copy on your own and give you a nice set of functions that are not, they're not fully try-catched and baked into DBA tools. But if you've ever used write-DBA table data, or on the SQL Server side, the write-SQL table data to get data from your data table into SQL Server. We used today, we had to use ODBC, and the reality is that it has some different requirements to do some things, and so it wasn't going to fit into SSIS, so I couldn't do that. The challenge we faced with using SQL linked server with this particular data source is that it did some translation. So it was an Oracle backend through a driver. And so it wasn't full Oracle. So we didn't have full TNS access to Oracle. So we couldn't use that scenario. What we could use is we could use ODBC because that software package had a driver. That driver gave us access with a username and password to the table set. And if you want to pull data from a table set and you want to use ODBC, you can't easily use DBA tools, right? -DBA data table. The table data, because you need a table, and it won't work with a reader. So an execute reader doesn't work. It needs data. So the last thing I want to do is pull down 1 billion rows into a data table and then shove that across to PowerShell and write that into SQL from a data table. Now we did test pulling data into a data table with fill, like a data adapter fill, and it filled the data set, and we were able to stuff it into a table. It was 1 row. It worked. 50 rows, 500 rows, 1,000 rows, 50,000 rows. It works great. Once you get into multiple millions, 20 million rows, you're not going to suck that down into a file. I mean, you're just not going to do it. You're going to want it to go streaming from one to the other. And unfortunately, ODBC, we did find a scenario where we could use DB Visualizer, but you had to use a really old version because they're written in Java, and you had to run a Java ODBC bridge. Unfortunately, that's not always awesome. And to get it to export in that old of a version, it just wasn't flying. But we could see the data. It didn't translate it so that we didn't get the errors we got in a link server, such as the big pieces were when you had a data type varchar2 on the other side, and it was 65,534 size. And it's like, well, in SQL, we use nvarchar 4000 or nvarchar max, but they didn't make it a max data type. They just made it bigger than 8,000 or 4,000. So you couldn't just, hey, select star from blah into a table. If it had one of those columns, it'd blow up and kind of give you an error. And not that that's not your fault. It's the MSDA SQL. So basically when we created a link server, we had to use MSOLADB for ODBC. And it's that translation layer from OLADB from the ODBC that blows chunks when it goes, I can't understand that data type of varchar 2 and bigger than 4,000. It just had no idea what to do. And so sometimes you got away with it if the data was long. You'd do a left on the data and get the data less than 2,000. You could do lots of things that lets you characterize the data a little smaller. Once you had more than 4,000, it just blew. So we use SQL bulk copy. So one of the sessions we'll do in the near future, in fact, maybe we'll just do it next week. But basically the idea is that we'll use SQL bulk copy, polling a data reader, which is fantastic. If you have an ODBC command object and you do execute reader, you get this reader object that you can pass into the SQL bulk copy object. Set all sorts of properties like enable streaming equals true, your batch size, which is what makes it go faster. When you have 23 million rows and you just let it not batch it, batch size is 0, which means that everything. It's one transaction. It hits the data table all the way out, and it's kind of yucky. Yeah, well, SQL Dev DBA knows what I'm talking about for that, because he named the product that we pulled data out of. And that's really what we had to do because it works out great for ODBC. They have an ODBC driver for themselves, so it actually works out great. So the reality is that you don't have to be left with no hope or using, we couldn't even find a tool that would do what we wanted to do unless we could connect directly to Oracle, which we didn't. We weren't able to in this particular case. So in that case, we just wired up the ODBC command, the ODBC connection, and did a SQL connection for the SQL bulk copy. And then once we fished all that out and put the query in there to select from the table with all the schema and the owner, then we ran the reader and passed the reader into the write to server of the SQL bulk copy, and voila! The data started flowing, and we didn't have any conversion errors. We did fix up the table they were ntext, which is terrible, but that's the conversion. We fixed them to nvarchar max, so we had at least a modern data type. And then we just did a SQL bulk copy right in, and the columns names were the same, so we didn't have to do column mappings, and the data just flew. It was fantastic. Our benchmark, we had, I think, a batch of, 500,000 was 3 minutes long. Pretty good. So ultimately you get the data, just it takes a while because you have to monkey around with monkey stuff. It's kind of sad, but anyway, that's one topic we're going to cover. Another one is going to be maybe some fancy log shipping, right? So most people have log shipping, and even DBA tools can set up log shipping for you in the traditional way, right? So the jobs and the GUIDs and all the things that happen inside log shipping, that is a product inside SQL. But the big deal is that we sometimes need a little bit more robust talk between how we copy files. If it's between servers on premises, then things are a lot simpler. But if you have to go off site and you have to either copy things up to a server, you have to do AWS to get to an S3 bucket, or whatever you have to do, you have to build in a custom type log shipping. And how do you keep track of that? How do you make sure you don't copy a file you've already copied? Or how do you know that you've restored that file when you have more files on the disk than you have restored. And so those are fun little things, but I think I've derived I have several different ways to Sunday to do log shipping with PowerShell. But the biggest piece is figuring out how you keep the communication alive between the two so that you know which ones you're doing. And I figured out a way to really to keep my log shipping secondary better cleaned up, because I often run out of space, right? So if you're trying to use robocopy, which I love to use robocopy if I have an option, if I can't robocopy to an S3 bucket. I mean, technically I can if I make it a share. I can log in with credentials and stuff like that, so you can do that. But log shipping becomes pretty much a black box, and like how do I make it do something else, or how do I log? How do I do this? And you really don't get that in log shipping. You get certain things, but you don't get what you want. So PowerShell just lets you create a log, start transcript, and then just watch things happen. If it fails, it can log that, hey, the log was already restored, and I'm bypassing that one, going to the next one. Stuff like that. I can move the files after I've log shipped them, after I've restored them. I can move them into a archive folder that, every 5 days I clean up, or, whatever. So that'll be a topic that we're going to cover. And then the rest of them really will be organic. So if you have ideas, put them in PolGab under the DBADuck room, and just say, hey, I'd like to see this. I'd like to see you demonstrate and go through this commandlet, or we'll take requests that way through PolGab. Just however many commands you want to see, just put them in each a separate question and let people upvote them. But the reality is we're going to go down the road of more practical stuff rather than just questions. We've done it since March. So March, April, May, and now we're through June. 4 months, and there hasn't been a ton of questions. SQL Dev DBA is my my question champion. He's had the most questions. And Bob the Lobster, I'm grateful for him posting a question today. But the reality is that I'm just going to go more practical, and we're going to do things. That'll be my DBA Tools contribution to the community and helping people understand how to use this function, what kind of things you can do that you may not think of doing, maybe some things that aren't in the examples that are actually practically really good to do or really able to do with DBA Tools. So that's where we're going to go in the future. I love Ask Me Anything, but I'm not as popular as Brent Ozar, and I haven't fostered the advertisement of PolGab as much as I should to get people to post questions. So we're just going to go practical and just do things, and it'll be different. If I have to invent them, it'll be different every week according to what I may have run into or what I did, just like I did today and yesterday on the SQL book copy. It might just be fostered from that because it's right fresh in memory. We can really go through it really easy. But there's some times where there's lots of things we don't necessarily use a lot. I use copy DBA login a lot. I use copy whatever, but there's some things that we will try to ferret out of the less traveled commandlets if they're requested on PolGab. If not, then I will make them up. So if you want to see something specific, I'm happy to take those first and dovetail in, and actually we can go deep dive and stuff like that because I'm versed in that idea. If I have never used the commandlet, we're going to find out how, and I'll show you how to fish. But I'll also give you some fish too, because that's fun to not have to invent your script. And then I'll basically I'll actually couple that with GitHub. I'm DBADuck on GitHub, so I have a repo that will just be basically streaming. It'll be a streaming folder, and in the streams there will be the weeks and the topics, and then I'll put the scripts that we create or that we do, and we'll just put them up on the streaming thing, and you can have those too. That way it's a complete package with the script. We'll reference them in the video to make sure you know where they're going to be, so I'll prepare them ahead of time. On the ad hoc ones, we'll just wing it, and I'll just add later. I'll just edit the video and put the URL in of where we put them so that you have them without having to worry about crap. Now where do you put them? But they will be by week, so it won't be that hard to figure out if you don't have it in the video, or if you want to get off the video and all of a sudden get them right now. I'll make sure they're staged pretty quickly after the presentation, and make sure that everybody can get them the way they want them. If not, you always have my email at ben@benmiller.net, and that is as easy as it gets to get to me. So happy to facilitate that front. I need a vintage Porsche. Yeah, sequel to FDB. I maybe I do and maybe I don't. Maybe I just need a Tesla or an electric Mustang or something like that. I don't know if I want a vintage Porsche. That denotes that I have a lot of money, and I'm not nearly in the situation Brent is. So maybe I don't want a vintage Porsche because his is going through a lot of work to get to where he wants it to be, which is cool for him. I'm not a car nut, so I guess I'm out of that boat. But thanks for the vote of confidence in getting me a vintage Porsche. I don't know if I'm going to go there yet. Well, then you have 2 Teslas. Okay, well, there you go. So I've been wanting one for a long time. I graduated from a gas vehicle to a Honda Accord that is hybrid. So I'm moving closer to an all battery thing. I wanted one, but I didn't want one that bad enough. And I hear that they're lowering prices on the Mustang and they're lowering prices on the Tesla. So I'm just going to bide my time until I really just cannot deal with it anymore and have to have my Tesla. And then I'll have to go on a road trip just to test out the idea of what it's like to go further than your distance that you can go in the car. So you get a long distance car, you go 350 miles or 323 miles or whatever it is, and then you got to stop at a charger somewhere. And I dread that to death. I almost want to rent a Tesla somewhere and test that out to see if I can tolerate it enough. I don't go on road trips a lot, but I do go down to Vegas. That's 6 hours, 5.5 hours, and that's longer than the car can go in one stint. So, and then I sometimes drive to California and sometimes I drive to Seattle. So those are definitely longer than a charge. So I'm a little gun shy on the charge thing, but I'll figure it out. If I get an all EV car, I will have to figure it out and see what happens. The Mustang, I just love the Mustang a lot, and they've done a lot of good work to the EV Mustang. And Ford's made a deal with Tesla that in 2024, Ford should have access to the Tesla chargers. So maybe it will be a good time to jump in the pool at that point. DBA took them both to Florida to Tennessee. Okay, that's a pretty decent trek. Supercharger or a better out planner. So that's why I say I don't know enough. I just really love a Tesla. I love the car. I went and test drove one. I love the car. I love the tech in there as far as the what do you call it? The blind spot monitor. There's no such thing on a Tesla. It's just you see the freaking semi next to you in a way cool way, so you know that there's a couple of cars around you other than just in your blind spot. There's actually cars around you that may not be triggering your blind spot, but Tesla certainly knows what's around you in a very gory way. It's really cool. And so I could deal with that kind of tech. I'm a tech guy. I would love to have that kind of tech in my car, and I have no problem selling my Honda to get that if I need to. So I'm good. But I'm glad you like Teslas. At least I'll just have to ping you later, sequel dev DBA, and we'll just have to have a chat. I love Glenn Berry has Teslas, and I've had Teslas. I think he's owned every model, Model S, Model 3, Model Y, Model X. I don't know if he has had an X. I think he has, but he loves it. He loves it a ton, and he's died in the wool. Tesla. He went on a big trip from Denver, Colorado to, I think, Kansas or somewhere, and he cataloged his thing, and he stopped for dinner, charged the car while he ate dinner. He had it all planned out. It was fantastic. So for me, I just have to get that skill. I guess I got to build that stamina in the skill set, and just jump in the pool. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll just grab my Model 3 and be happy. I really like a Model Y, but we'll see how cost effective it is. Or like I said, the Mustang. Mustang's an SUV and it has plenty of space, just like the Model Y, and we'll see what happens. But super dovetail on that context to go into cars and Porsches instead of PowerShell, but such is life in this session that we talked about a couple things. But thank you. It's time now, and I appreciate SQL Dev DBA with all the questions and comments. It's fantastic to have something to talk about. But we will have many things to talk about in the coming days of the schedule. If you think that this time is a good time to do something, 4 o'clock Mountain Time, Mondays, please put some comments either on the YouTube channel or I can't remember. I think you can comment here after the thing, but thanks for being here, SQL Dev DBA, and the other people who were here that just didn't chat. And we will catch you on the rebound. Hopefully everybody has a great day tomorrow and this week, and we will check you out again another day. Thank you and have a great, great day. See you later. Bye-bye.